I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons first. Thank you so much to my Bibliospren, Bibliohowlers, and my Bibliomancers. It means a lot to me that you give me your extra support for my passion and hobby. Hi everyone, Petrik here. So today's video will be something new. I haven't done this kind of video ever on my YouTube channel. So about 2 months ago, I posted at the end of the month of February, I posted a video about the worst trends in fantasy. This video talked about some of my issues with some trends in the fantasy genre, whether this is publishing, cover art, or content. But for today's video, I will not be talking about my opinion. Instead, I will be reacting to your comments and thoughts regarding some of the worst trends in fantasy. This video is not my idea. I've seen plenty of other booktubers like Elle and many more did this kind of video, but mainly from Elliot Brooks, which you definitely should check out if you haven't checked out her channel yet. But because I haven't tried making this kind of video on my channel, well, I thought I might as well try it for the first time and see how it goes. So there will be 6 categories for this because there are plenty of comments that I got from my community tab from all of you. I have divided these comments into 6 categories and I will start from the first one and then I will talk about my opinion on your comment regarding some of the worst trends in fantasy. I agree with some of them, I disagree with a few of them. So yeah, let's start. And the first category will be about the topic of series length, whether it's a standalone or it's a trilogy or longer than that. But the category is the length of a series. And the first comment is this one. This one has 50 likes and it says, every book is a series. We need more fantasy standalones. I absolutely agree with this one. Do not get me wrong here, I love series. Most of the books that I read are fantasy series. But I think the adult fantasy genre lacks a satisfying adult fantasy standalone novel, especially a one-off standalone novel that is not part of any series. Like for example, Tigana by Guy Gabriel Kay. But my personal favorite, The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang, which I consider to be the best standalone fantasy novel of all time, is a part of a series. It is a part of a larger series, even though it still works as a standalone novel. But it is part of a series called Tea and Night. But there is one thing to consider here. It is difficult to pull off a magnificent and satisfying standalone novel in adult fantasy. And I think that is why we don't have many adult fantasy standalone novels. And for the next 3 comments, these are something I completely agree with, and I will just mention them first. Might be controversial, but seeing a lot of popular series ending and then they get sequels again, like, can we not? Sometimes the ending is perfect and we don't need more. Sometimes less is more. Prequels are still okay, but like I said, less is sometimes more. This one has 43 likes. And then the next one is the worst trend is writing trilogies or long series for the sake of it. If it can be done in one installment, all the better. And finally, extending series. Keep it to a trilogy or duology. Extending to 5 and 7 book series just dilutes the quality potential of the secret sauce. This is something that I completely agree with. Just imagine this. How many adult fantasy standalone, and I'm talking about standalone here, how many adult fantasy standalone book that started off as a one-off standalone and then it got extended into a trilogy or sometimes even more? Like, for example, Dragon Mage by M.L. Spencer. I love that book. I approached that book thinking that it would be a one-off standalone novel, and I'm happy it will become a series. The second book isn't out yet, but I'm happy that it will become a series because I still crave the characters. I want to read more about the characters and the world. But let's say it doesn't get a series treatment, I will be satisfied and I will consider Dragon Mage as one of the best one-off standalone novel. But I cannot consider that anymore because, yeah, it is no longer a one-off standalone novel. It is a series now. And the same can be said for The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson. To this day, it is still a one-off novella. But Brandon Sanderson recently mentioned it will become a series. So the thing that is so worrying about this, and this is not exclusive to a standalone but to a series as well. I've read plenty of series like a trilogy that got extended into another trilogy, or sometimes in some worst cases like The Wheel of Time. It is a 5 books or 6 book series that got extended into a 14 book series. Yeah, I think that is one of the worst example of this one, or one of the best example really. But my point is that sometimes, well, most of the time, when it comes to the situation like this, extending a series unnecessarily result in a backfire. It is very rare when a series gets extended that the sequel series or the extension turn into something better. Relatively rare. Most of the time, it turned into something worse and should have been left alone, in my opinion. Anyway, so yes, I completely agree with this one. Unless the author really know how to extend their series, I think, if possible, they should not overstay their welcome. And the next comment is a bit interesting. Duologies though, I prefer a standalone or a trilogy. I do not think I can fully agree with this one. I think it all depends on execution. But I do think it's kind of weird how many duologies are starting to appear now. Duologies are something that was really rare in adult fantasy. I actually cannot recall many adult fantasy duology. I think to this day, when it comes to duology, most of them are YA fantasy. And even in my mind, the first one that I think of is the Six of Crows duology by Lee Bardugo. That one was a good one. But I haven't read enough duologies to say that I completely disagree with this one. But for now, I would just say it all depends on execution. I mean, going back to the topic that I said before, if duology can work, then why extend it to a trilogy, right? And one more comment before we move on to the next category. I'm not a fan of novellas within a larger series. If I don't read them, I feel like I'm missing out. But I also don't like paying nearly the same price for the short story as what it costs to buy a full-length novel in this series. Plus, they often look bad on bookshelves because they're not the same size as all of the novels. This one is a bit interesting. I thought I'm the only one who thought about this. When it comes to novellas in a series, they usually work better than a one-off novella that is not part of any series. Usually, they work better, from my experience anyway. But at the same time, I agree with this comment because it feels like we have to read so much, otherwise we would miss plenty of contents before we dive into the next book in the series. I know that authors like to say that you don't have to read the novellas, but still, the novellas exist now. I subconsciously or consciously need the extra content. I do not want to feel like I'm missing anything. And usually, the novella contains some important information that affects or enhance the experience of reading the main novels. Like for example, Dawn Shard or Age Dancer by Brandon Sanderson. These two are novellas in the Stormlight Archive and they are important. I do not think if you are a diehard fan of the Stormlight Archive, you can actually skip these novellas. Or Mistborn Secret History. If you are into the Cosmere or Mistborn Saga, that one is a must read. It is not a complimentary installment. It is a must read. So I understand this, and do not even get me started on the price of novellas, especially the one published by Tor.com. If you follow me on Instagram lately, I posted a bit of a ranty Instagram story saying how insane the price of the novellas published by Tor.com. I'm speaking specifically for Untethered Sky by Fonda Ali, the hardcover on Book Depository, which is, well, it's about to close down. But yeah, the price of the hardcover is $33. This is for a 100 pages book. That is absolutely insane. For $36, I can actually get a hardcover of The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. That one is more than 1,000 pages long with a lot of artworks. See how crazy the comparison between these two? So yeah, I completely agree with this comment. So that's it for the category for the length of a series. As you can probably tell, I agree with many of them, almost all of them. And for the next one is even more compatible with me because yes, we are talking about cover art. And the first two comments are related to each other. The first one is this: duologies, trilogies, longer series, I'm fine with all of it, but can publishers get their act together and make sure that covers match, the spine text lines up, and the books are the same height? How can that be so hard? It's not rocket science. I'm looking at you, Saga Press. Did none of you look at all 4 books in the Dandelion Dynasty? That spine art is unforgivable. And the next one, of course, is the top one. It is about changing cover art or artists halfway through a series so the covers don't match. So yes, obviously, I agree with this one wholeheartedly. I have been very vocal about my dislike regarding cover change and, well, spine not matching and all that. I mean, I have even done one video, I think only one, yeah, but it is one video regarding my well, let's just say my anger with the Dandelion Dynasty treatment. The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. For those of you who don't know about it, for the US hardcover published by Saga Press, Speaking Bones underwent a cover artist change. But that is still okay because the cover art somehow still matches the design of the previous 3 books. However, the spine change was just absolutely awful. I know that this seems like a small thing, but it is not when it is a part of your favorite series and it is something that you want to collect and display nicely on your bookshelf. I will not rant too much about this one on today's video. If you want to know my full thoughts regarding this, well, you can just check that video out. But yeah, I completely agree about this. This is one of the worst trends in publishing in general, not just fantasy. Just take a look at how awful the treatment regarding The Last King of Austen art by Ted Williams. The first and the second book in The Last King of Austen art was done by Michael Whelan, and then the third and the fourth book, no disrespect to the artist here, to the new artist, but well, I prefer Michael Whelan and I do not like the cover change. I know that this is not up to the author, this is done by the publisher. But yeah, it is so sad and unfortunate. And for the next comment, this is Amber from Sword and Pen. And I think you should check out her channel. This is a new channel, a new booktube channel. And I think even though there are only about 3 videos, I think, right now, but all of them are pretty damn good already. You definitely should check out her channel. And this is her comment. While they can look great on a bookshelf, book covers that do not depict a scene or characters from the story just don't catch my attention. Similarly, a book cover that depicts a landscape that does not showcase something totally original about this particular fantasy world doesn't intrigue me either. A picture of an apple in someone's hand does not say vampire romance to me. It says lunch snack up for treat. For this one, I can certainly understand the annoyance. For example, I think for this, I can definitely say it is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. The cover art doesn't depict anything about the books at all. If you look at the cover art, you will not be able to predict what the book will be about at all. And although the cover design and the cover art actually matches each other, but yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't show anything about the book at all. If I actually see the 5th season on a bookstore without knowing anything about it, I would not be able to know anything. I would not be able to predict what book this is about. I might not even pick it up because I would not be able to guess that this is a science fantasy novel from the cover art. And I think this kind of situation frequently happens because of one thing, and this is related to the next comments. I'm tired of minimalist cover art. I miss those beautiful paintings that used to be common on fantasy and sci-fi books. Super minimalist book covers are so boring. Let's get back to detailed, realistically painted scenes, please. And yes, there it is. Do not get me wrong, I have nothing against minimalist cover art, but my preference, well, let's just say that I agree with these 2 comments. In fantasy and sci-fi, I tend to prefer illustration and artwork rather than minimalistic cover art. Minimalist cover art can be beautiful, they can be pretty, but after a while, you will see that all of them are just so similar with each other. Well, not all of them, sorry about that, but many of them are similar to each other. Just take a look at Legacy of Ash and also Fire and Blood. Legacy of Ash is by Matthew Ward, and Fire and Blood is of course by George R.R. Martin. These 2 books, they are so similar in both cover art and design. And yes, they are done by the same artist, Larry Rostand. But my point stands. These 2 are an example of minimalist cover art. I think after a while, with many other fantasy books and sci-fi books looking like this, even though these 2 books actually looks pretty awesome, but after a while they can feel pretty generic. I think it's good to have a healthy balance between illustration and also minimalist cover art. I think minimalist cover art often happens in UK published book, and illustration I think more often appears in US published book. And sadly, US edition usually is more expensive than UK edition. And of course, my point is related to the next comment. I hate how cover art and design is often imitating other successful books. This happened with all publishing through not just fantasy. And I totally believe that Legacy of Ash is meant to imitate Fire and Blood by George R. Martin. Both of them are published close to each other, and Legacy of Ash is often advertised. I have actually read Legacy of Ash, and yes, it is advertised as Song of Ice and Fire meets The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell. It is actually an appropriate description, but yeah, I understand what this comment is saying. I cannot say I fully agree with this though, because, well, the cover art to Legacy of Ash looks pretty good, even though it is similar to Fire and Blood, which again looks pretty awesome. And the last comment before we move on to the next category, well, this comment is related to the next category immediately, and the next category is about content inside a fantasy book. So the comment says, permanent stickers on cover. Let's face stickers in covers of any kind, because you cannot always peel them off without ruining the cover. Books not the same size in a series and cover art that doesn't match also irritates me. A romance that doesn't need to be there and becomes the focus as the series goes on. So yes, I definitely hate sticker on a cover, and I have covered this earlier. I do not like my books not matching with each other, whether it's size, cover art, or spine. And now let's talk about content. The next comment is again about forced romance. Forced romance, I hate it. Not every book needs romance. I agree. If you cannot write a well-written romance, there is absolutely no need to include it in your book, especially in adult fantasy and sci-fi book. I do not have any issue against romance. I mean, love is a huge driving factor of many motivation for humankind. But if you don't feel like you can write it well, if you don't feel like you can actually put it in your book, and you think you have to do it just for the sake of it, I do not think you should do that. I know that reading experience will always be subjective, but yeah, I think many readers can feel whether a romance feels forced or not. When we encounter fantasy books like this, when we actually see many reviews saying the romance feels forced, usually there is a good reason for that. But in the end, I think it all comes to preference and also subjective experience. And for the next comment relating to content, and this is again from Amber from Sword and Pen. As I said, you should check out her channel, and this one has 48 likes on the community tab. And she says, too many epic fantasies taking place in worlds that are 100% dark, greedy, or gross. More beautiful, cute, or quirky worlds, please. I still think Harry Potter had a ton of success as a memorable world because it was full of fun magical things in everyday life, such as pictures that move and talk to you, buses that whiz through London unnoticed as lampposts jump out of its way, books that try to bite you unless you stroke the spine, every flavor bean candy, prankster poltergeist, homework that involved trying to turn a hedgehog into a pincushion, a clock that told how each member of the household was faring, etc. To have a dark main story take place in a fun, quirky world creates wonderful contrast. Whether you agree with this comment or not, I think this is beautifully commented. I think for a while, when A Song of Ice and Fire or the Game of Thrones TV show was booming worldwide, I think there was a huge jump in grim dark fantasy or dark fantasy books with morally gray characters. Sometimes they are too dark for plenty of readers. And I do understand how they can be tiring. I personally love reading grimdark fantasy, but I also love reading an epic fantasy in a beautiful world with a darker story. A good example of this is a book that I recently read, The Will of the Many. I think James Islington really nailed the contrast between the darkness and light in that book. Or The Bound and the Broken series by Ryan Cahill and The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. These two books, they are not grimdark fantasy. They are heroic epic fantasy, and yet the stuff that happens in these books, they are pretty grim. They can be pretty grim, but we know the main characters. They are good-hearted people. Sometimes they have to do questionable things, but they are doing the best they can to protect the one they love. And yeah, I think contrast is really, really good in epic fantasy. It is even good in grimdark fantasy. A grimdark fantasy that is just relentlessly dark without any sign of hope and beauty can be hard to stomach. So yeah, I agree with this comment, and I think we have finally shifted from the trend with grimdark subgenre, and now we are having more, I think, cozy fantasy. I think cozy fantasy is really the new trend in adult fantasy right now because of Legends and Lattes. I have certainly seen plenty of cozy fantasies popping up right now. Well, cozy fantasy and progression fantasy. Progression fantasy is because of Cradle. And speaking of grimdark subgenres sparked by popularity, well, the next comment is something related to this one. My dislikes are authors jumping on a trend. Harry Potter was successful, which was followed by wizard schools, not just in books, but movies as well. I do not think this comment actually affects a published fantasy. I think this one is more related to traditional publishing, because traditional publish, before they get published by a traditional publisher, they have to go through an agent, and also they have to be accepted by the traditional publisher. And well, I think traditional publisher will always look for something that is on trend. And as I said back then, A Song of Ice and Fire was so popular, and because of that, there was a surge of grimdark fantasy subgenre. And for the next category, let's talk about fantasy as a genre. We only have a few comments for this one, and the first one is that people somehow still think that fantasy is not a seriously regarded genre. And wow, this one, I can actually make an entire video surrounding this comment. But I have talked about this plenty of times. I do not agree with fantasy being not regarded as a serious genre at all. I think it is one of the most difficult genre to tackle. To put it as simply as possible, not only you have to create a compelling plot and also convincing and captivating characters, and then sometimes actions, well-written actions, and these three can be found in plenty of historical fiction and other genre. But only fantasy and sci-fi deals with crafting a completely new world. Although in sci-fi the story usually takes place in our universe, but yeah, there are still original cultures, technology, and many more, especially in space opera. But back to my point, on top of compelling plot, characters, and actions, fantasy authors have to craft a world that feels believable even if they're not real. Readers have to feel engaged with the world and also the story and characters. They have to feel like they're immersed in the world crafted by the fantasy authors. So I disagree. I think, if anything, fantasy should be regarded even more seriously than it already is. And moving on to the last two comments in this category, they are related to each other. And the first one is gatekeeping. I absolutely agree that this should be banished, and it is one of the worst trends in fantasy. And the last one, when people don't appreciate the variety of types of fantasy in the genre, and that if you don't like a book they're a fan of, there is something wrong with you. Completely agree. I have been dealing with this so many times as a reviewer and also as a content creator on YouTube. It is frankly shocking just how frequent this actually happens. If I don't like a book that you like, it just means that we have different reading experience toward it. We are all different kind of people, no matter how similar our reading tastes are. We cannot love all the same book. It is impossible for that to happen. If I don't like a book, it doesn't mean the book is bad. It just means that the book is not suitable for me. It is simple as that. Reading is a very subjective experience, and the quality of books is also subjective, in my opinion. Most of it is very subjective. I think the objective quality of a book most of the time is like typos and all that. I know some of you consider me as a positive reviewers who usually post only about books I love on my YouTube channel. Well, you're not wrong. I most of the time only post reviews for a book I love on my YouTube channel, but I do post about books I dislike on my Goodreads and on my Novel Notions. Most of the time, I just don't feel it's appropriate to give more negativity toward a book I dislike on my YouTube channel. And when I do this, I receive some comments saying that I am a shill. And come on, it's really not like that. I never accept paid reviews. Never. I can actually show you some emails I got and my replies if you want to see them. I never accept paid reviews because I know it will be difficult for me to remain unbiased toward that book if money is involved. I just prefer to talk about books I love on my YouTube channel. It's simple as that. I do talk about every book I managed to finish on my monthly wrap-up, and that includes books I dislike. So that's it. But I do not like to, create another negative review on my YouTube channel after posting a negative review on my blog and also on Goodreads already. If that actually happens, it sometimes feels like I'm trying to destroy the book or something. It's like I'm trying to make sure readers stay away from the book, and that's really not what I want. And when I say something negative about the book, and yes, I have received some really angry message from an author and readers, when I dislike a book, I am called a negative person who create toxic space for a book to be attacked. Yes, this is actually paraphrase from a message I got. I will not mention the author, but yeah, I got this message. So yeah, see, I cannot win. Content creator or book reviewers cannot win whether they like or dislike a book. They cannot completely win. There will always be someone displeased with that. So yeah, I agree this is one of the worst trends in fantasy. And for the three remaining categories, they are pretty short. And the next one is actually about book titles. All the comments are related to each other. And here they are. Tired of the trend of book titles that fall into the overused pattern, underscore of underscore or underscore and underscore, but only use common or familiar terms to fill in those blanks rather than terms that are unique to the fantasy they are about. For example, while Shadow and Bone makes sense, it says nothing about the unique Eastern European inspired setting. Looking at titles alone, I am not especially intrigued by City of Bones, Daughter of the Forest, The Hero of Ages, A Crown of Swords, The Way of Shadows, A Coat of Thorns and Roses, etc. You get the idea. And then the next comment says, titles of the type X of Y and Z. And then for the last one, might be not important, but I'm so tired of the titles of the style, the blank of blank and blank. So many of them. So I think these comments pretty much stated that, well, readers are tired with titles like A Court of Thorns and Roses, or series title like A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. But I think from my perspective, A Song of Ice and Fire is one of the reasons why this become a trend in book title. Might be anyway, because again, Game of Thrones was a worldwide phenomenon. It's hard to not follow the trend when something like that actually happens. But you know, from my experience, I don't actually see a lot of titles in adult fantasy following this pattern. So I cannot say I fully agree with this one because I haven't seen too many of them except in YA fantasy. I actually don't know whether Court of Thorns and Roses is YA fantasy or not. Some have said it is YA, some have said it is not. But yeah, I don't see a lot of this actually happening in adult fantasy. Most of the time it is word of word, like The Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. I cannot fully agree with this one. I don't actually mind the pattern itself, but I agree that book title has to be less generic. Like for example, some of my favorite book titles, I haven't seen any of them repeated in any other books. Like for example, The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. There is only one book title, The Lies of Locke Lamora. That's it. The first book in the Gentleman Bastard sequence. Another brilliant title for a series. And then of course, The Name of the Wind or The Wise Man's Fear by Petrik. I haven't seen any book title with the title The Name of the Wind or The Wise Man's Fear. Or again, one of my favorites, The Light of All That Falls by James Islington. This is the only book where I stumbled upon this title. So yeah, I think one of the comments here says that a book must not be generic. A book title must not be generic. And I agree with it. But I do not fully agree regarding the pattern. I think A Song of Ice and Fire, for example, is an incredible series name. And if someone can pull off a series name like that, but remaining original and related to the content of their books, well, I'm all for it. And now we arrive at the sixth category of today's video, and that is about Kickstarter and special editions. I only have 2 comments to mention here, and the first one is about million editions being released before even the book is out. I get it, some books are hype, but this seems wasteful to me. That's what the comment says. And this is my thought regarding Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. That book, even though only one book is out, it already has like 50 editions. I'm not joking, it is that much. You can actually search it online. When you combine the advanced reading copies, you combine the standard edition, the hardback, the paperback, and then the limited edition and all that, there are more than 40 editions for Empire of the Vampire. And this will only get worse once the second and third book is out. I think by the end of 2030, there will be like 300 special editions for Empire of the Vampire. J. Kristoff is the next J.R.R. Tolkien if we're talking about this. Only one book in the Empire of the Vampire trilogy is out. Imagine the big budget that can be put into other books rather than putting it into one book that frankly doesn't need that much. 40 edition is just overkill. It is overkill for one book. It don't need that many editions. No book ever need that many editions. I do not even think Lord of the Rings need that many editions, even though the Lord of the Rings has pretty much earned its legendary status. And the last comment in this category is about Kickstarter. Kickstarter, don't like it. Self-publish all you want, but do not like overpriced and add-on nonsense. It's going the way of video games and having to pay DLC upfront. I do not agree with this one, sorry to say. Kickstarter is a great thing to do to publish beautiful hardcovers, sometimes even to publish a book, because it's not as easy as saying self-publish all you want. Self-publishing is expensive. Some authors actually rely on Kickstarter to publish their standard edition because they do not have the budget to edit, to hire a cover artist, and also to print their books. This is where Kickstarter can really save their career. even start their career in some cases. So I cannot agree with this one. And also, I love having beautiful books. I think Kickstarter is also a great way to participate. I do, however, can say that some Kickstarter projects need to be better because some of them, the delay are absolutely insane. I have actually seen some books actually delayed by 2 years. I still don't have Cradle, which is almost a year past its projected completion. I still don't have the Cradle hardcover yet. So yeah, I think some Kickstarter projects really need to be better. I can agree with this comment if there is no other option for a cheaper book. Like for example, there is no option for a cheaper ebook, there is no option for a standard hardcover at all. That I can understand. But most of the time, I think when it comes to Kickstarter, the books are always affordable with extra stuff included in it. And you don't actually have to pay for the more expensive tier. Like for example, The King Killing Queen by Sean Spickman. Right now there's a Kickstarter project for it. So for this Kickstarter project, there is a $30 pledge, I think. Yeah, there's a $30 pledge and you can get the hardcover and also the ebook with that money. And the hardcover will already contain the beautiful cover art and also interior artworks by Donato Giancola. That is amazing with $30. And going back to the topic I mentioned earlier regarding the price of novella, the price of Untethered Sky by Fondali is $33. That is only a standard novella. So can you imagine the comparison between these two? One published through Kickstarter with a lot of interior artworks and it is beautifully produced. One is a standard novella, but it is more expensive than the one published through a Kickstarter. But in this Kickstarter project, there is an option for a $2,000 or $2,500 pledge option. And yes, that one is insanely expensive. I cannot afford that one, but you don't have to pledge for that one if you don't feel like doing it. You can just get the standard hardcover, the standard $30 hardcover with all the bonus inside. So yeah, I cannot agree with this one. I think Kickstarter is a great addition to self-publishing and also publishing in general. I think it gives threat to traditional publisher, and now traditional publisher are starting to release their own special edition. And I believe self-published fantasy Kickstarter are partly responsible for this. As Brandon Sanderson said, competition is good for publishing and the genre. And finally, we arrive at the last category and the last comment of today's video. I know this video is long now, but yeah, the last category is simple and the last comment is also simple. Brandon Sanderson. Now, as a Brandon Sanderson fan, I obviously cannot agree with this one because I love Brandon Sanderson's books, but I can certainly understand if you are not a fan of Brandon Sanderson's books. I can certainly imagine how this become one of the worst trends in fantasy. I can understand that. It is not fun to see something. It is not fun to see something you dislike keep popping up in social media, across all social media. It is not fun to see that, especially when they're as frequent as Brandon Sanderson. And hey, I'm a fan of Brandon Sanderson. If you take a look at the history of my channel, I haven't done many videos specifically on Sanderson's books. I usually talk about his newest release, but yeah, most of the time, that's it. I have posted almost 300 videos and I think the Sanderson specific content is only about 10 videos if it actually reaches to that. And one of the reasons why this happened is because, well, I just think there are so many Brandon Sanderson content already on YouTube. And if I cannot offer or provide anything new to it, I might as well not do it. That's my thought anyway, but who knows, this might change in the future. So yeah, I do not fully agree with this one, obviously because I'm a Brandon Sanderson fan. I'm a fan of his books. I think Stormlight Archive, Mistborn, and the entire Cosmere is incredible, but at the same time, I understand where you're coming from. So that's it. That's the end of today's video. This is one of the longest videos that I've done. Surprisingly, this has become one of the longest videos I've done on this channel. And I just want to say thank you so much for all your comments. It means a lot to me that you commented on this. Again, if some of this you do not agree, do not fight over it. We all are different person. We all have different opinions. And I think we should respect each other's opinion as long that we are not attacking each other. Do let me know what you think about these comments and some of the worst trends in fantasy that haven't been covered on today's video. As always, thank you so much for watching and thank you for your support. Bye bye. Lastly, I want to say thank you so much once again to all my patrons who keep on supporting me.